Good morning and welcome to the Feed the Soul Summit. My name is Miriam and I am the founder of Athlete Soul. If you don't know about Athlete Soul, we are a nonprofit organization founded and run by former athletes. Our mission is to support retiring athletes as they transition away from sport, raise awareness about the challenges of athletic retirement, and encourage athletes to develop beyond sport. If you want to learn more about the organization, you can visit our website at athletesoul.org. Now, we're here today for our Feed the Soul Summit. This is the second edition of this event. We will be running this session for the next 3 days, started today with a session on athlete wellness, followed by a session on emotional health. In the first session, we'll be talking about nutrition, sleep, and stress management. Please note that the event is recorded and will be shared with registered participants as well as on our website and social media channel. We're actually not going to be taking questions today because we have some really quick panel discussions, but you'll be able to submit questions after the event for an online forum discussion. Now, I would like to get started straight away with our first presentation, which is called How to Speak to Your Athlete About Food. It is presented by Katie Spada, who is a licensed nutritionist and former elite athlete. Katie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate having you here on this presentation. I'm going to pass it straight on to you so you can share your screen and get started with the presentation.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, Miriam. Let me go ahead and get the presentation up and presented. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. I am super pumped to be here at the Feed the Soul Summit for the second time. I'm really excited to chat today about talking about food and how to support your athletes in their nutrition in the best way possible. So I'll quickly just introduce myself. Miriam said that I am a licensed nutritionist. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. I was a former synchronized swimmer. I competed for a very long time on the national team and at the college level before retiring and transitioning into my career now as a dietitian. I'm a master's candidate in a nutrition-focused sports and fitness program. I'll be finishing that in December. And then I am the founder and CEO of my nutrition coaching company, which is Spada Strong Nutrition LLC. And my clinical background is in pediatrics and pediatric ICU, which really works with our athlete communities because a lot of them are adolescents, teenagers, young adults, things like that. So I'm really excited to chat today. Okay, so where are we going from here? The main topics we are going to discuss are talking about weight and body composition. How can you have those conversations in a caring and compassionate way with your athletes? They can be sensitive conversations. So what are some ways we can approach them? Part 2 is going to be working with your sports dietitian. If you are fortunate enough to have a sports dietitian available to you, how can you work with them to bring the most benefit to your athletes? And then part 3 is going to be possible consequences. And what that refers to is possible consequences for your athletes when they are drastically cutting weight or dieting, and how we can help prevent some of these consequences. Okay, I loved this quote. I found it in one of the studies that I was looking at for this presentation, and it reads, "In the field of sports, coaches play a significant role fulfilling the most important position for the team as well as for the athlete." And so as coaches, as support staff, there is such an imperative role in providing the best environment for the team, for the audience, if you have members that are viewing your events. So being a coach is an incredible opportunity to make such an impact. Okay, so diving right in, the first thing I want to address is eating disorders in the world of sports. And eating disorders are very tricky because there are different ways that we can identify them and different ways that they show up. Just so some broad statistics that address eating disorders in the world of sports. A study found that Division I athletes, about a third of them demonstrated risk factors for anorexia nervosa, and this was NCAA female athletes specifically, over a third were at risk. Athletes in aesthetic and weight class sports, we're going to talk about that. They were also at significant risk, which makes sense considering the pressures there are on weight class and aesthetic athletes to look a certain way, make a certain weight. But these numbers were very high percentages. 62% of female athletes and 33% of male athletes are affected by eating disorders in the aesthetic and weight class sport worlds. And then college athletes were at an elevated risk for developing eating disorders in general. So just by pure fact of being a college athlete, that puts them at an elevated risk of developing an eating disorder. Okay, so jumping right into what can we do as a coach, as support staff to help facilitate the best, healthiest environment for our athletes and prevent the development of eating disorders as much as possible. One of the biggest things is our words. Our words matter. They have so much power. And I like to say performance over appearance. Now, this isn't going to apply for every sport because, again, there are some sports where we have to make weight, we have to appear a certain way. But as much as possible, can we focus on performance over appearance? When we focus on the ability over the look, we are taking away this pressure for an athlete to have to change their body to fit a certain mold. So can we talk more about their speed, their agility, their performance on the field, instead of needing to make a certain weight, needing to look a certain way, or fitting this ideal body? Again, within those sports where body weight or body appearance is not such a demanding factor. If we do have to have those conversations about weight loss, body composition changes, appearance, can we do them in a way that is full of compassion and also caution? I am in a mentorship program that specifically focuses on high performance nutrition for elite level athletes and how we can approach weight conversations in a caring and compassionate way. And so making sure that your athlete knows that this is coming from a place of, hey, I want to make you a better athlete. I want to improve your abilities. And so that the athlete knows you really care for them as a person. Sometimes when we have these conversations, it can be really challenging for the athlete to see, I'm not just criticizing you. I'm not just criticizing your appearance. I am having this conversation from a place of, I want you to succeed and be the best possible. So when we can have those conversations, infusing as many positive tones, expressing care as we can. In this mentorship program I'm in, it talked about how as soon as weight loss is mentioned, sometimes the damage is already done. And so approaching those conversations with as much care and compassion as we can really help prevent or hopefully minimize any damage mentally, emotionally, and physically that these conversations can have. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when it comes to words, how we can incorporate our sports dietitian to do that, and always prioritizing the health of the athlete over the aesthetic. As athletes, we tend to go to extremes. And so if there is an athlete who we've had this conversation with where we do need to maybe change our body composition or alter our appearance in any way, looking out for those red flags where the athlete is taking it to the extreme, drastic weight loss changes, mood changes, cold tolerance changes. Are they socializing differently? There are so many triggers or red flags rather, that we can be aware of where, hey, maybe this athlete is taking this to the extreme and now we are putting their health at risk. Their health is at risk. And so we always want to make sure we're prioritizing health over that aesthetic piece. Okay, I loved this quote from Dr. Friedman talking about the scale. It was specifically referring to young adults or adolescents. This is directly from the American Academy of Pediatrics website. And it says, scales don't measure anything other than weight. They don't measure the presence or absence of health. They don't measure whether a child is being fed a nutritious diet. They don't measure whether a child is regularly active, and they don't measure self-esteem, but they can take away self-esteem, can't they? And that's so true. The scale can be an extremely triggering tool because it can also be a tool for many athletes. So if you are choosing to use the scale, or if you have to use the scale in your sport, can we do so to make sure the athlete knows This number is just a number. It's just data. It's not indicating anything outside of that. Because again, the scale is not telling us how an athlete is fueling. An athlete could be drastically losing weight. We're excited. They're going to be they're going to make their cut, whatever it might be, but they're doing so in such a damaging way. And so making sure we're really looking holistically at how is this weight loss coming about? How are these numbers changing? And I'm specifically mentioning weight loss, but the same goes for weight gain. If there is a sport where you're wanting your athletes to bulk up, gain weight, how is that happening? Are they doing so by managing their health and prioritizing their health, or are they doing things that might be putting their health at risk? The scale does not tell the whole story. And so we do want to make sure we're looking at other factors as well when working with our athletes. If you are in a sport where body composition or cutting weight or meeting a certain weight goal is a key part of the sport. So how can we talk about food? I love to say there are no good or bad foods, and you might be like, wait, what? You're a dietitian. Of course there are bad foods. Well, the language we use around food makes a really big difference in how we approach our food choices. So when we say that food is good, we are attaching a moralistic value to food. When we say food is bad, same thing, we're attaching this moralistic value. There is no moral value to food. Food is food. Yes, there are more nutritious foods. There are more nutrient dense and rich foods. There are less nutrient dense foods. If we use that language rather than good or bad, we're taking away that morality. An example I love to use here is if you've been in your office break room or at work or just a family gathering or something like that, and there are, let's use, the holidays are coming up. Let's use pie for an example. And someone says, oh, I'm so bad today, I had a slice of pie. How does having a slice of pie result in that person being a bad person? This is kind of what we're insinuating when we say foods are good or bad. Same thing with a salad. Oh, I ate a salad, I'm being so good today. We are indicating our morals as a person based on our food choices. And that's when guilt, shame, those feelings of fear around food become really strong, because now we're attaching this sense of morality. So can we walk away from using the words good or bad to describe food, unless we're talking about the expiration date? Then we can use the terms good and bad, making sure that the food is still good or the food is bad, it's spoiled. But outside of that, good and bad should not be used in our vocabulary when addressing food. Nutrient dense, less nutrient dense, carb rich, protein rich, different words like that, rich in micronutrients. Can we address the food more based on how it fuels our body rather than good or bad? This simple change of language can be really a game changer when it comes to how we approach foods. So now, instead of feeling guilty for eating a donut or feeling out of control around donuts, we recognize, okay, a donut is going to be very carb dense. It may not be the best option for me before a workout. It's not going to fuel my body best. I know something like a banana with peanut butter is going to be more nutrient dense. That's going to fuel me better, instead of saying good or bad. So really focusing on how food fuels the body can make a huge difference just when we're having conversation about food. And that goes even outside of the sports world, just in society in general. Because there is a time and a place for all foods. And when we have that mindset, food no longer has control. Okay, so talking about that, coming into the power of restriction, if you have been on a diet before, if the diet says no bread, the first thing you're going to think about, the one thing you want is bread. There is so much power in restriction, and that really comes down to the mindset around food. So creating an environment within your team where there are no off-limit foods, again, coming back to that, how food fuels us. Is this the best time to have this food, or is there maybe a better time to have it, something else that's going to fuel us better? When we have these off-limit foods, we end up with something called the restrict binge cycle. And I was having a conversation with one of my coaches a couple of years when I was retired out. It was one of our strength coaches. And she said, I know this athlete is really struggling because she eats great during the week and then she just binges on pizza during the weekends. And it's really impacting her. And so I would come back with the question, well, why? Why is this athlete binging on pizza on the weekend? It's not a matter of willpower. It often has to do with the fact that she's restricting during the week. Maybe she or he is not getting enough food during the week. Maybe they're cutting carbs too much. Maybe they're just simply thinking that pizza is bad and they shouldn't eat pizza. The next time they have the opportunity to eat pizza, they're going to overeat it. So really changing the narrative around food can be beneficial in preventing this sort of restrict binge action with athletes. And this restrict binge is a lot more common in weight class athletes, which we'll talk about, or aesthetic sport athletes who may be trying to eat clean or cut weight, things like that. Anytime there is a restriction placed, the immediate thing we're going to want to do is overeat it as soon as we give ourselves permission to. And one way that we can facilitate this healthier relationship conversation with food in our sport and in our team environment is to avoid using food as a reward or as a punishment. For example, saying, maybe with our younger kids or even our college athletes, you can have ice cream post game because you earned it, associating that need to do something to earn food. Or restricting foods, like you can come to the wall or you can come get a water break or a snack break as soon as you perform. So putting that stipulation where food, water, snacks, they have to be earned, or you have to do something good in order to earn food, that creates this relationship with food where we feel like we have to do something in order to earn it. And that doesn't allow for freely fueling your body. That's when athletes oftentimes think that they need to work out in order to earn their food, or they have to burn off foods. And you can create this obsessive exercise restrict cycle where athletes might be doing workouts beyond practice, which can negatively impact their performance on the field in order to compensate for foods that they have consumed. So really, again, removing those restrictions, talking about, and if you have a sports dietitian, using that sports dietitian, talking about how food can be beneficial and how all foods fit, and there are certain times and places for food, not basing fueling off of performance, rather just knowing that the fact that they're an athlete, they deserve to fuel their body as well. Okay, so coming into more about the weight loss, the weight cutting sports, this is something that we can't deny in sports like rowing or boxing, wrestling, different things, different sports like that, where you have to make weight. This is a piece that we can't ignore. And so something that we talk about is informed consent. And what that is making sure that the athletes know the possible consequences of cutting weight or of drastically needing to change weight for their body and for their health. Ensuring that they're aware of the risks. And some of those risks are metabolic injury, which if you've ever had an athlete in a weight cutting sport where they had no problem achieving weight the first 1, 2, maybe even 3 times, but the more they do it, the harder it is, the more they have to cut and restrict in order to reach that weight, they might be experiencing metabolic injury. Their body is adapting and it's restricting the drastic weight changes. So making sure athletes are aware and they're informed, hey, these are some of the things that you could experience by being involved in this sport that requires weight cutting. Anytime we talk about weight loss, really, or body composition changes of any kind, informed consent is important. It's important for our athletes to know how what they're doing can impact their body, not just now, but lifelong. It could result in weight cycling. The athlete drops weight, gains weight again, drops weight, gains weight again. From research, we know that weight cycling has an increased risk of chronic disease later on in life. Diabetes, heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, things like that. When your body goes through such drastic weight changes consistently, it increases our risk for development of those illnesses. And this goes for just the chronic dieter as well. Maybe you're just not in a sport, or you do have an athlete in a sport and it's not a weight class sport, but you notice they have significant body weight shifts. This could be something that they're experiencing, this weight cycling, and it does put them at risk for chronic illness development later on in life. The other thing with these drastic body changes is body image. So you have a wrestling athlete or a UFC athlete or something like that, and they reach this cut weight and they're feeling amazing about their body. And then they go into the refeed period, which is incredibly important for preventing that metabolic injury. And now their weight has changed, their body has changed. They're experiencing drastic body image fluctuations. Having someone like sports psych or an informed sports dietitian on staff to help them navigate those body image struggles as their weight changes can be really helpful and prepare them for showing up the next time in the next season, the next fight, whatever it is, to go through that change again. When athletes do experience those drastic changes, it puts them a little bit more gun shy or a little bit more hesitant to engage in the refeed period because they want to stay at that cut weight. That may not always be the healthiest weight for them. And so making sure that they know it's so important to have that refeed afterwards, again, to prevent metabolic injury or to limit the damage of metabolic injury can be really important. And working with a sports dietitian who, again, is informed about these risks can help minimize the potential consequences for your athletes. They're doing it in the healthiest way possible. Okay, so we kind of chatted about talking about food, addressing these conversations. If you were fortunate enough to have a sports dietitian available to you, how can you optimize that resource to the best of your abilities? We're going to chat about that. The first thing is laying the foundation and making sure the coach dietitian communication is clear, being on the same page with your sports dietitian. So have a conversation with your sports dietitian, share what your goals are. If you're in a weight class sport, talk about which athletes you have that need to change weight classes or which athletes that have had a struggle in the past. Communicating what language do you want to have utilized? What are your beliefs around nutrition? There are some times, and I've been a part of teams where we have access to a sports dietitian, but then the message from the sports dietitian is so counter the message from the coach, it gets confusing and it gets conflicting as an athlete. And as an athlete, of course, we're going to listen to coach because we want to make sure that we're playing, we're in good graces with coach, we're respecting coach. Sports dietitian, and we'll talk about making the sports dietitian an integral part of the team. But the sports dietitian, what they're saying, even if they have credentials, may not carry as much weight if coach is not on board. So having that communication at the beginning of season, what are the messages that you want infused into your team culture? How can the sports dietitian assist with that? Really having that two-way dialogue. So that way you're on the same page and the athletes are getting a uniform message as well. That's really important to have that cohesive messaging. So destigmatizing seeing the dietitian, and I'm sure my colleagues in the sports psych world would agree, sometimes there is this stigma associated with seeing a sports dietitian. Either, oh, I only am seeing the dietitian because I have to lose weight, or, oh, I'm only seeing the dietitian because I have a problem, either an eating disorder, disordered eating, something like that. So can we destigmatize the dietitian, seeing the dietitian and including the dietitian in your work, knowing that it's not just for athletes who have a problem, either the weight gain or needing to lose weight piece or struggling with food, but the sports dietitian can be an invaluable resource for all athletes. That is really the goal, creating that environment where the sports dietitian is a valuable resource for all athletes. Maybe you have the dietitian come in at the beginning of the season, have a team talk, introduce themselves, share what ways that they can benefit the athletes. Maybe it's requiring or having every athlete have at least an initial conversation with the sports dietitian. So you're not singling out certain athletes to go see the sports dietitian. Doing things like grocery store tours or cooking classes can be incredible ways to facilitate the comfortability with your sports dietitian. Because a sports dietitian can help with more than just weight loss and weight gain. We can be there for performance improvement, injury prevention, injury recovery. There are lots of ways we can utilize nutrition to improve our performance and also prevent injury, improve the recovery of injury if injury does happen. And so we can be there for your athletes in multiple different roles. It's not just if they have a problem. And so bringing in that sports dietitian early, allowing the athletes to become comfortable with them, maybe having the sports dietitian bring snacks to practice or having post-practice fuel available to them so they know the dietitian is there to be an ally with the athlete can be really helpful. And these are some of those non-weight-based performance indicators that a dietitian can help you with. If you are looking to, if you're not in a weight class sport or you're not in an aesthetic sport, and you're looking to steer away from using the scale as a way to gauge whether your athletes are performing or improving or not, these are some other things that we can assist with as a sports dietitian. Recovering post-training, or excuse me, your recovery time post-training, increasing weight in the weight room, your sleep quality, increasing speed, increasing power, injury recovery, your energy levels. These are all things that your sports dietitian can assist you with that have nothing to do with weight or appearance. It's simply adjusting how you fuel. And these are just a handful of things, and there are plenty more things that we can assist you with in improving performance amongst your teammates. Okay, part 3, addressing the nutrition consequences for athletes. It is so important, both emotionally, physically, and mentally, for athletes to have proper nutrition. And as much as I think athletes do try, they may be unaware. And so as a coach or a support staff, being aware of these potential risks and looking for them, looking for the potential red flags, so that way you become tuned into, oh, this athlete might be at risk, can be really helpful in catching things before they spiral either into an eating disorder, an injury, or something like that. I loved this quote again from one of the studies that I utilized for this presentation. It says that coaches play a pivotal role in the early identification of athletes at risk of low energy availability. Now, low energy availability just means that the athlete doesn't have the energy available in their body to meet the demands of what they're doing, the energy that they're expending. And that could be intentional if an athlete is cutting weight, dieting, trying to change their body. It could also be unintentional, because sometimes we don't realize how much energy our athletes actually need in order to support the work that they're doing in practice. And so being aware of these potential consequences as a coach, you are able to zone in and see, oh, and maybe identify first thing before anybody else can, this athlete might be at risk for low energy availability. And that is something you can work with your sports dietitian on. There are equations that we have that can tell us what is this athlete's energy availability and recognize whether they're at risk early on before putting them at risk for injury, eating disorder development, those sorts of things. I loved this visual. I took this visual from the Robert Sinton Mountjoy study, and it shows you the different impacts of relative energy deficiency in sport. And these are all of the potential things to make note of and be aware of when you're watching your athletes. Gastrointestinal. Do you have an athlete that is constantly running to the bathroom or constantly complaining of being bloated, having a stomach ache? This could be a sign of low energy availability. Immunological. Do you have athletes who are constantly sick? They're constantly getting sick. You're like, their immune system is just in the trash. This could be a sign that they have low energy availability. We have to have energy to build an immune system. And so that is one of the first things that could be impacted by low energy availability. For our female athletes, having a normal menstrual cycle is so, so important. And amongst the sports world, it's almost seen as like a badge of honor, or like, oh, I'm so fit because I don't have a cycle. Dispelling that within your female sports teams and letting them know, like, it is so important that you're having a regular cycle. If you don't, this is a sign that something is off. Bone health, athletes who are consistently getting stress fractures or easily breaking bones. If you've got track and field athletes, cross country, any sort of contact sport where they might be breaking bones more frequently, if that's happening, this could be a sign, specifically the stress fractures, that they have low energy availability. Endocrine dysfunction, that's going to be if you have athletes who drop their blood sugars really fast, or they feel really dizzy or lightheaded, this could be a sign as well. We talked about the metabolic injury piece. If you have an athlete who is struggling to change their body composition, we want our athletes to be metabolically flexible. That means they're able to change body composition without too much of work. You're able to make small changes and the body responds. That's being metabolically flexible. If they're metabolically injured, it might be taking a lot more for an athlete to see change. And then hematologically, athletes who are anemic, this is a huge red flag, specifically in the female athlete population, but also for our male athletes as well. If they are anemic, this could be a sign that they don't have enough energy availability. For our adolescent athletes, growth and development, are they staying on their growth curve? Are they falling off the growth curve? Those sorts of things. And then psychologically, an athlete who might be showing signs of depression, socially pulling away from team events, that could be a sign as well. And cardiovascularly, this is going to be something that you're not going to be able to necessarily see. But if you're having team physicals, does an athlete have a significantly low resting heart rate, lower than the normal athlete resting heart rate? That could be a sign as well that their body has adapted to low energy availability. These are all of the resources that I utilized for this presentation. If you have questions after this presentation, I would love to share more about these resources with you, dive into the science of it a little bit more. And I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be here presenting and talking about this, having this conversation. I think these conversations are so important. And as a coach or a support staff, you have such an amazing opportunity to really get ahead of preventing. I'm so sorry, this was on Do Not Disturb, preventing your athletes from running into those sorts of issues. So yes, thank you so much.
Katie, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation, as usual, very enthusiastic and lots of great information for us. We have a question from the audience, and then I have several follow-up questions for you before we move on to the next panel. So
amazing.
The question comes from Megan, who is part of our audience. She's basically asking you if you don't have access to a nutritionist on your staff, are there any resources that you recommend?
Absolutely. So if you don't have access to a dietitian on staff, you can always go to eatright.org and find a dietitian in your area. The other thing too is a lot of dietitians are now working virtually. And so if you have access to Instagram, to be honest with you, Instagram is a great resource to find sports dietitians. I know there are sports dietitians specifically focusing on high school athletes, fueling high school athletes, fueling college athletes. And so looking at eatright.org if you're looking for a local dietitian, or utilizing social media. And when you are using social media, the things that I would just caution is make sure you're finding someone with the credential registered dietitian nutritionist. So RD or RDN. That is going to make sure that you are finding someone who is licensed and board certified. Another credential you can look for is CSSD, and I always mess this one up, Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics. And so that is someone who has gone through the training to be certified specifically in sports.
Thank you, Katie. And we'll share these resources with our participant afterwards. So if you can share that with me, I'll make sure to send it to everybody as well.
Absolutely.
There are actually some more questions coming in. And one is about the integration of nutrition within the work of college athletics. So how do we encourage support personnel, development staff to make sure that the nutritionist or the dietitian works with the coaches and the athletes from a whole perspective?
Such a good question. So something that I've found in talking with coaches that can be really beneficial is having an initial conversation at the beginning of season, getting your entire team available. If you've got sports psych, a sports nutritionist, athletic trainer, any sort of ancillary staff that you have a meeting with them in the beginning, let them know like, hey, we want to bring you in. We want to make sure that you're an integral part of the team, and just opening up that conversation. I know a lot of college sports dietitians who say they don't feel utilized as much. And that's partly on us too. We need to be more, assertive and saying like, hey, we want to help your team. And so if you have a dietitian available and they do come to you, opening up those lines of communication. But I do know making sure that everyone that is on your staff being on the same page, having that initial meeting at the beginning of season, just so everyone's introduced, can be really helpful. The more often you bring the sports dietitian around the team, the more accepted it's going to be. Hey, this is just another person, like our athletic trainers. I had no problem going to the training room because I knew they were there, they were available to me, but going to the sports dietitian felt like kind of shameful. So having the sports dietitian around can be really helpful as well.
You bring a good point, because having your nutritionist actually come to your field or your pool or the ring, wherever you're training, I think is a big message that that person is more on board with the coaching staff. And this is something that we see with the trainers. So that's a really important point. And I love this idea of fostering supportive team environment around nutrition. And so I wanted to ask you if you have example of team building activities that you can do using nutrition and food related activities.
Absolutely. So if you do have access to a sports dietitian, they usually are able to bring food to your practice. So maybe you do something like building a post-practice refuel snack. Maybe it's doing smoothies or creating a trail mix, giving your athletes the opportunity to get involved. Maybe it is something like cooking classes, and you do different cooking classes with themes based on different cuisines. Or if you have multicultural, we did this on my team. I loved this. If you have like a multicultural team, everyone brings a dish from their culture, and the dietitian can talk about the nutrition behind it. Maybe it is doing grocery store tours, which I know in COVID can be a little bit more challenging because, going out socializing, but maybe doing something virtual with your team. Having a night where you do cooking together, that can be really helpful. So these are all just ideas to bring in that nutrition piece in a team supportive way.
These are great suggestions, Katie, and I love the idea of doing some cooking sessions together, or even using, HelloFresh or that type of boxes delivered to do that sort of exercise with your team as well.
Yes, absolutely.
On another topic, you talked about the word that we say as coaches. Word actually matters, especially when it comes to nutrition. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to ask you if you have examples of what to avoid, what word to avoid, and what could we replace them with?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest, this is such a big topic. And so with the words, I talked about good versus bad, but even saying something like fattening, or, because one food is not going to be fattening. What actually causes weight gain is the combination of the foods that you're eating. So one food does not create fat. So instead of talking about like, oh, that's fattening, that's going to cause weight gain, taking that away and saying, hey, how is that going to fuel your body? Is that going to give it the best nutrition possible? I actually had a coach say, oh yeah, well, we tell our athletes to avoid eating like waffles. If you go to a continental breakfast, right, the waffles are there because they're the devil. Don't use words like that when you're talking about food. If you can really take away any of those negative connotations around food and encourage talk like, oh, this is a fiber-rich food, this is protein-rich food. And if you don't know, if you're unsure, asking your sports dietitian as well. But that would probably be the main thing. Or again, if you hear talk in the locker room, oh, I'm so bad because I ate X, Y, and Z. Eating does not dictate your morality. Stopping that conversation and encouraging communication on, okay, hey, did I fuel my body best with this food? We really want to separate morality and food. That's when we run into issues.
Katie, I have a question for you, because we deal with athletes from 50 from a young age to 25 years old. There are a lot of different fluctuation in your weight during that period of time, especially on around puberty and after puberty. And I'm curious if you could give us an idea of when a person would reach their natural kind of weight level. At what age would that be? Because I think that gives us an idea of how much it's going to fluctuate before that period of time.
Yes, this is such a good point. So from like a growth standpoint, usually female athletes are going to reach their growth potential if it's not stunted from under fueling around 18 to 19. So that's right as they are entering college. If you notice that significant weight shift from freshman year to sophomore year, that's probably not the freshman 15. That's more likely just the natural growth trajectory that an athlete is having. If you notice that it goes significant, then we can have those conversations. For a male athlete, it's not going to be until their mid 20s. So 23, 24, 25, our athletes, when they're going through college, are going to be seeing significant weight fluctuations. So that's why working with a sports dietitian, sports medicine is really important to make sure they're tracking on their growth curve. And our growth curves can sometimes go up all the way to 26. Sometimes in the Children's Hospital, we'll take people up to 26. And so utilizing that as a resource, but knowing those weight shifts may just be their body's natural progression with growth.
Super, super interesting, Katie, because really we keep changing throughout life, and our brain also is not fully developed until 25 years old. So the words that you use really do matter. We may know as adults, right, that you know, those words when you say fat, they don't exactly they're not linked to your self-worth, but for children and people that are still developing, they may take your word the way they are, literally. So I think that was really important that you mentioned that. Thank you so much for this presentation, for your time. We're actually going to move on to the next panel. We'll be sharing more information about you as a follow-up email. And I know that Michael also has shared in the link in the chat, the link to your LinkedIn as well as to your website. So feel free to reach out to Katie if you need any help or if you have any further questions. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks so much, Miriam.